Today we have with us an acquaintance of mine named Lindsey Articolo. Lindsey, hello, welcome to the interview.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I just want to give Lindsey a brief bio and you can fill in more. From what I don't know about you, I'd love to hear more of your story here, and we're going to go into it in detail. Lindsey is the mom of 3 beautiful kids. She's from Pennsylvania, correct?
From Connecticut.
Connecticut, okay. But you're living currently in Pennsylvania?
Nope, live in Connecticut. We met in Pennsylvania while I was on vacation.
We met in Pennsylvania, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize I was on vacation. So she and I and my wife Julie met while Julie and I were visiting family in Pennsylvania many years ago. So we've only met Lindsey in person once, but it was great to make her acquaintance. She works in the medical field. She is the co-author of a book titled Evolution of a Revolution, where she details her disabled son's health journey. Lindsey grew up in an evangelical church, and she would say that even though the first crack in her belief system came early in her teens, she's still figuring out exactly what she believes. So Lindsey, thank you very much for being willing to do this interview.
Pleasure.
And I wanted to start just also by saying I commend you for bravery and sharing your story. I know it's not easy to talk about these subjects sometimes.
Yeah.
And appreciate that. So let's see here. What I wanted to start with was asking you just to go over your story, to kind of whatever comes to mind, but specifically focused on your faith story. Where you brought up in a Christian home, that kind of stuff, and just everything that brought you right up to here that you would call a highlight.
Yeah, so definitely, brought up in a Christian home, both folks and their families, all Christian, all evangelical. We even all went almost all to the same church and would have Sunday dinners because we all lived locally. So sharing the same belief system was a big part of the culture of our family, definitely growing up. And I would go to camp starting age 8 at Word of Life in upstate New York, for anyone who might recognize that, and went every year until I was old enough to work there. And then I would work there for the summers. So yeah, I was all in, knew nothing else.
The Word of Life camp is pretty popular in certain Christian cultures, right?
Yes.
I've heard of it. I've never been there, but I've heard a lot of people mention it over the years.
Yeah, very popular.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I didn't really know anything else other than, to feel sorry for those who did not know the truth.
So at what age would you say that you actually made it personal for yourself? Like you actually prayed a prayer to trust Jesus as your Savior?
So that's complicated, right? So I don't know. I don't know that I ever prayed the prayer. I know that that's the prerequisite. I certainly tried. I prayed, I believed, I was baptized. I didn't really know anything else. I was young.
Yeah, I think that's very typical. A lot of people just kind of feel like, and in many ways, maybe it's even an ideal to say I was in the gospel and I was in the grace of God so young. I don't remember a time when Jesus wasn't all in all to me, and that's in some ways an ideal, really, for the Christian faith. And it's amazing how many people I've come across that would say that they just don't even recall pre-Christian times.
No.
Yeah.
It was never I grew up, with my grandmother taking care of me, singing all the songs, it was just, that was so completely who we were.
And you have any siblings?
I have a younger brother. Okay. He lives in Pennsylvania, and he's who I was visiting when we met.
Okay. And is he a believer?
He is. He's a youth pastor in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Gotcha. And so what happened next after the whole Word of Life part of your life? So
my folks divorced, and then my very good friend, who I loved very deeply, came out of the closet and told me he was gay. And I remember we were the ones who were at the prayer at the flagpole in front of the high school. It was all in. Anyway, so I could not reconcile what I was raised to believe and him, who obviously loved God, saying he was gay, which I believed I didn't believe it was a choice. I didn't. I wanted to believe it was a choice, but inside I didn't. So I remember having a conversation in the car with my mom and a cousin who was older than me, looking for advice, and talking about this subject. And this was the beginning. This was the crack, because I could not reconcile homosexuality and the Bible. And I don't remember what she said. I remember afterwards my cousin pulled me aside and told me that he was also gay, and that you could be a Christian and love God, and it didn't matter what your sexuality was. I talked to him last night because I was trying to remember what that conversation exactly was, but he doesn't even remember having it. But it was such a pivotal point in my life. Yeah, that was when I was. So then I kind of dropped out. I was 16. I dropped out. Stopped going to church. Did I still believe in God? Yes. But was it a personal thing anymore? No. I wondered. I had started to. There was a class in school that was modern government or something like that, and the teacher was very obviously very liberal, and she was kind of opening. Maybe she wasn't that liberal. I don't know, actually, just based on how. Anyway, I was raised. It seemed extremely liberal, but kind of opened my eyes to some different point of views. And there would be class debates and stuff like that. And so you'd have to produce facts. And so at that point, yeah, I just dropped out. And I dropped out for many, many years.
Would you say that, and I want to hear what comes next, but just to interject this question.
Yeah.
When you were in that phase, would you say was more, I'm going to give you two options, but add a third or fourth if I'm being too strict on this. Would you say it was more that you were believing that God was there and that you just didn't agree with his, his precepts, his word, or more of an issue of, I'm not sure if this is actually real, if this is a real God?
Maybe both.
Okay.
Maybe both.
You know what I mean? Because sometimes you hear people that say, I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic, but you get this sense when you hear their story, they're more like almost like the Jonah figure. They're just running away from God. They're like, they're not really, they didn't leave because of a logic issue or learning about where the Bible came from issue. They just don't like the morality issue. They, as the Christians might accuse them of, they just want to sin. They're not necessarily saying there's no God. They're just like, I just don't like the way that this is working out because it's putting pressure on me. But they don't really have really good reasons to just walk away at that point. Is that at all relevant to your part of it?
I don't know if I was running away so much as it just wasn't important in my life anymore. I backburnered it, I guess. Mm-hmm. And for many years, it's only really been the last year or so that, so I watched this documentary on Netflix. I don't know if you saw it. It was something about biblical times or the mysteries of the Bible or something.
I don't know if I have or not.
Okay. It was a historian and a I don't know. She goes to all these places. There's like 6 Bible stories or something. And she talks about how back then actually there were multiple gods, and the Bible actually references multiple gods. And this was, my head exploded. I didn't know that was a thing, that the Garden of Eden may have been actually the garden of a castle of a king, like just all these things. Adam and Eve weren't literally the first people. Most historians agree that the Bible is not intended to be a literal thing. And like I said, my brain exploded. And so it's just been, I think, maybe even just about 9 months or so that I've been like approaching this in a different way, from a different context.
Do you have people in your life do you feel like you can talk to about any of
I
these, or do you feel like?
have a couple. I have one cousin. She's still very religious, but she doesn't believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, and she isn't a literalist. And I have one good friend who I texted when I first saw that and she's like, oh yes, she's a deacon in her church, and she's like, oh yes, you can be a Christian and not believe the Bible literally. It's not intended to be. But
So you grew up more in a literal.
Oh yes.
Okay.
There was a flood. He created Adam and Eve on the 6th day. Yes.
Were you taught the idea of hell being a like eternal conscious torment, a place of burning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Was that as you were going through your time of kind of backing up and starting to reassess things, did that concern you, that maybe you were pushing your own future towards a horrible eternal place?
No, because I believed that if there is a God who created us, he didn't create us to live in eternal torment. I haven't subscribed to that in a lot of years. I don't know how I made up my mind about that, but we have to insert logic here at some point.
Yeah.
I don't believe God created all of us to live in eternal torment. I don't believe that unless you were born in America in the last 400 years or so, that's your only opportunity to know the truth about the Bible and have heaven be your reward. I don't believe that. I never have. Not never, but the last 20 years or so.
Do you, as you're trying to, ask these questions to yourself and investigate and figure out what you believe, have you felt like the church itself has been a safe place to any extent to investigate the claims of Christianity?
So I found a church, and I found it, haha. It's 2 houses from me that way. There's a church on my corner that's a UCC, which is a very open kind of church. And yes, I've had talks with the pastor. I find him very supportive, and the body, they're very supportive. Unfortunately, I started going last winter, and then obviously in March, so I only went for about 3 months. But he posts on Facebook a lot with his personal thoughts, little videos and stuff, and I find it very encouraging. Yeah.
And as you're going through all this, I know you mentioned your husband is not a believer. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So he was raised by his folks. His dad is an atheist, and his mom is a Lutheran. Okay. So he didn't really go to church much or anything like that. It's just not a value of his. Does he believe there's a God? Yes. He finds it ridiculous what I used to believe. He can't believe people really live like that. He's not really been exposed to very many people who live that way.
So when you say you said he is an atheist, he would call himself an atheist?
I'm not sure if I think my husband believes in God.
Is it like the biblical God or just like a higher power?
Just a higher power.
Okay.
I'd say that's what I believe too at this point. Okay. A higher power and energy. Yeah.
So going back to the church you mentioned that you found, if you are leaning more towards that God is possibly real, but is more along the lines of a higher power, not the God of the Bible, what excites you or attracts you about going to a Christian church where they do hold the Bible as their authority, even if it's different from the authority as you grew up with?
Right. It's different. I think his interpretation of the text is quite different. He's more about the abstract and more about the stories of goodness of Jesus than the fire and brimstone kind of situation. Okay. Yeah, there's no talk about that.
Okay. Do they, can I ask this? This is kind of just to create a standard for, different conversations that I'm going to be going through just to make sure it's clear. Do you feel like you are really clear on the gospel message? Like if someone said to you, what is the bare bones gospel? What is that about?
So the gospel would be that God sent his son to the earth to die for our sins so we could go to heaven.
Gotcha. And just to elaborate for anyone who's, that is certainly the core of the gospel, just to elaborate for anyone who's not familiar with this, and if that question sounds weird to you, what we're saying is that the gospel starts with the bad news, of course, that God looks at everyone and says, you've all sinned and fallen short of my glory. You all do deserve punishment, and that the only option is to have a substitute that is perfect. And it was pictured in the Old Testament through the sacrificial lambs and the blood, but that when Jesus came, he was the final sacrifice. He was the perfect, spotless Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And that what Jesus does for you when you believe is he's not making you perfect, although that will come in glory. He is declaring you perfect because you get the righteousness of Christ accredited to you as if it was an account. He becomes what's called a propitiation. He becomes someone who takes his perfection and applies it to you as if you were perfect. And in God's sight, you're justified. You are declared righteous. That is your hope as a Christian. It's someday when you die, you get to heaven. And God says, "Why should I let you in?" You don't say, "Because I was a good person." You say, "Because I was a sinner, but Christ redeemed me. Christ became my substitute. He took my place. He died and rose again, and I identify with his death and resurrection." That is the gospel that Lindsey put in summary fashion, but that's what we're talking about in the bigger picture. When you look at that, the whole thing, does the gospel sound right to you anymore?
No,
Okay.
not at all. I think heaven, I mean, even if you're going to go biblical on this, I think that biblical scholars even say Jesus didn't even know he was the Son of God. Like, he just was a guy. He was a great guy, and he was, a popular guy, but he did not even acknowledge that he was the Son of God, and that was not determined for decades after his passing. So, I mean.
Yeah. On that note, I don't want to get off track because I'm going to get into this later or in another video, but are you familiar with the line of thinking that he may not actually have ever existed in the first place?
No.
Okay, gotcha. I won't get into that too much yet. And we may need to wait for that from the video, but there's a lot to be said about that. A lot.
Okay.
So.
I mean, I'm open-minded to pretty much everything at this point. I feel like trying to pigeonhole something is.
Yeah. Well, could I ask this? Could you tell me what comes to mind if someone said to you, just give me a couple things at the top of your list, what sounds wrong about this whole thing? Like, I know you've been in it, so you know what you had many years of thinking what sounds right. You know what sounds right about this thing. When you step back and someone says, just when certain things started clicking, certain gears started turning, you step back and you say, I used to have this mentality, and I'm putting words in your mouth here, these are my words, but I used to have this mentality of whatever I was taught is the truth.
Yes.
But now I'm going to step back a little bit, step back from the forest and say, something about this picture isn't right. When you started feeling like that was an option for you to even say such a thing to yourself, what kind of things popped into your head?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly remember thinking, if that prayer for my salvation is so important, why isn't it in the Bible? Why is it like this thing we make up? Why is so much of this story narrated by my pastor instead of by this book? Why would God, like I said before, make us to sentence us to eternal torment? It makes no sense to me. If I'm supposed to believe that God is good and God is perfection and God is, I cannot believe that he would create us for eternal damnation. I cannot.
And I'm going to move on to some other topics in a minute, but I want to also ask, how does your change relate to what you teach your kids?
Yeah, so my kids have not grown up in church at all. They don't come with me to the church next door. Um, they went to a Lutheran preschool, so they know the basics, knowing the ark and so forth. My daughter, the last 2 summers, has gone to a Christian camp with my mother, and has come home with Bible apps on her phone and stuff like that. So we've had some conversations about different religions, but she's always had this. My daughter understands that the world is a big place, and that what other people believe is just as valid as what she believes. I think these kids are just so much smarter than we were, or at least me, at their age.
And your mother is a believer, I'm gathering.
Oh yes. Like I'm hoping you're not going to tag me on Facebook, because if she sees this, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble.
What would you say that that's a source of contention for you all then, that she is not comfortable with where you are, or is she even concerned about your possibly being on the wrong path to hell?
Concerned about me and my family being in hell. Okay. Definitely, yes. Yeah.
Do you all feel like there's a freedom and an open door to talk about it, or is it just you do your thing, I'll do my thing, but I'm really wishing you'd come back to my way?
Yes. Mm-hmm. We try not to talk. So obviously the last 4 years have been highly politically charged, and our relationship means a lot to us. So we try not to talk too much about things that are super contentious.
Okay. Gotcha. Good. I have a similar situation. I think it's not quite shunning, but I can't talk about these subjects with family for the most part. It's just, we talk about work, talk about the kids, but you want to talk about why Christianity is not real, why it's mythology. It's not an issue of present your ideas, but I'm probably going to reject them. It's like, I don't even want to hear it.
Okay. Don't
even start. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
I was telling someone else that, and I don't want to belabor this because I've got a lot of questions for you, but okay. It's been interesting to me, the idea that if someone really believes you're going to hell, really believes it, you would think that they would get over any awkwardness or sense of, I don't know what to say to you, and just, they would do anything they could to try to keep those doors open and say, I just got to get the gospel to you. If you think you know the gospel, you clearly don't, because you don't understand. Why would anyone reject the love of God? Why would anyone want to go burn in hell forever? Why would you reject the whole reason you were created? And they would just do anything to get the gospel to you, just push it at you or weave it into your life somehow to send good vibes towards you, something to say, please, let's talk about the gospel. I don't have anybody, nobody is saying, can we please talk? Nobody's saying that at all. And I'm shocked at that.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense to put it that way, but
it does make sense. I hadn't thought of it that way, which is like my favorite new phrase. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Good one.
I'm just grateful that it doesn't come up, because like I try to tell her, this, or I send her, I don't know if you're familiar with like Nadia Boltz-Weber or some of these other Rachel Held Evans.
I've heard of her, yeah.
Okay, so I'll send her like little things that they've said, or prayers, or little video sermons or whatever, and she'll say things like, that's very interesting. It sounds like they're making the Bible, it sounds like they're turning the Bible, or, I'm going to say it wrong. I'm sorry, Tim.
You're making the Bible say what they want it to say?
Yes. Yeah.
Putting words in God's mouth?
Yeah. If it doesn't agree with their perfect narrative, it's wrong.
Yeah, I would, to my shame, admit that was how I would have seen those people too. I don't know the first person you mentioned, but I know Rachel Held Evans before she, not knew her person, but I knew of her work before she passed. And I would have, at that point as a Christian, considered her just a liberal Christian and very much in need of either just of the gospel, maybe she'd understand it, or at least a much clearer version of it, because it just didn't seem like she was really grasping the authority of Scripture, the gospel of grace. It wasn't clear, it wasn't solid, it wasn't biblical. And I would have rejected her as a false teacher of sorts. And it is,
Yeah.
it's amazing the mentality you get in that.
It's amazing, right? I mean, to discount every other belief. That's some audacity.
It is. Well, I was going to add, that's actually a good segue. I was going to ask you next about when you look at other people and who have a different faith. And if you were to, just to give an example, if they were to say to you, Lindsey, why do you believe in Jesus? And if you had, back in the day, if you had said, well, I believe because the Bible is obviously the word of God and blah, blah, all this stuff, you could go through philosophical arguments. It must have come from somewhere. There must be a prime mover. It must be God. And the best understanding I have is that he revealed himself through Scripture, revealed himself through Jesus, ultimately, and salvation is his gift to us. And they say, yeah, but we've got books too. We've got holy books, all that. And so you might say, or at least some Christians would say, yeah, but I have the inner testimony of the Holy Spirit. I have his peace in my heart. I have the joy. I know when I pray, I can feel him in my heart. He's giving me joy. He's giving me direction. I've seen miracles happen. I've seen it. I've prayed and it's happened. And they say, well, I have too. And I've got a different God who is completely opposed to your God. Like when you start thinking, and I know as you nod your head, you've already thought this, but what goes through your head when you think this doesn't sound actually that different from other faiths? I don't mean in the core content. I mean just in the experience of it.
Yeah, it's so true. What goes through my head now is, I don't discount anyone's beliefs. It's got to be personal. Like I think you're coming at this from atheistic point of view, and
yep, absolutely.
maybe I'm not. And I think that's okay. I think we have to be true to where we are in this time. And for me right now, it feels really good to be uncovering these truths and having a different sort of approach to when I do read the Bible, which I'll be honest, I haven't even opened the thing. I have it right here next to me. It's been here for 6 months. I still haven't opened it. But I read all these books about the Bible and about people who are exploring it and deconstructing it and the history of it and all of those things I do read. And
Can I make a prediction?
Yes.
If you go down anywhere near the kind of path I've gone down, you will actually probably, time permitting, with your kids,
right,
probably open your Bible a lot more. And the reason I say that is there's a dynamic that I'm finding very consistent, and I'm sure I'll come across some people that don't do this, but I've come across so far a consistent experience where when people deconvert, as much as you might expect them just saying, well, what do you think would happen to a person like that? You'd expect them to kind of say, this is garbage, I'm done with it.
Yeah.
But there's some aspect of it where people go back and they say, I want to understand how this happened.
Yes.
And it's like one friend of mine, he describes it as this concept of I was abused, like as if you were abused as a person by someone else. And you finally escape it, and almost like a Stockholm syndrome, where you didn't mind being in that relationship, but once you're out of it, you're like, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
And it's like you approach it psychologically. What was I bringing to the table that let me think for so long? Like, how did I believe this stuff for so long and not question it? But then you're looking at it, well, just apart from my response psychologically, where did this actual story come from? What is this book?
Yes,
and
that's what I am.
Yeah. And so many Christians, so many atheists that I've met, they know their Bible infinitely more than Christians do.
Yeah.
I mean, not just the text, but the context. And I don't mean that in the Christian way that they usually say it. I mean, the actual historical context.
Yes.
They know Greek mythology inside and out. They know Roman and Greek gods. They know Jewish history and Jewish mythology inside and out. They know all this stuff. And it's like, why do we have to know your book better than you do?
Yeah. Yes.
That's my prediction. I predict if you do follow some path, you'll be in that Bible a lot more. But from a very different perspective.
From a different perspective, and that's what I'm kind of planning for. I don't know. Have you heard of the great courses? The great
Yeah.
course. So they're some of my podcasts, because all I listen to are, well, I listen to true crime podcasts, but I also listen to a lot of Bible deconstruction podcasts.
Okay.
And the great courses has specials all the time, and I don't know. I think I'm gonna do Genesis.
Yeah. If you come across any that you'd recommend,
Yeah.
I would love to hear them. And one I'll recommend to you that I'm just starting, so I can't vouch for all of it, but there was a podcast called Dragons in Genesis.
Okay.
Where he just goes through all the stories, apparently from what I understand of it, and he just kind of tells you the background of where this would have come from historically. And I don't know if that doesn't make sense. We're going to dive into that a little later. But just the whole idea of there was a story that another group of people had, and basically the people who wrote the Bible were either copying it or responding to it, changing the story to make it a different outcome, kind of synthesizing different ideas from it. But it came from some other source, like you mentioned, the Garden of Eden. There's other stories where there was a garden and there were people in the garden, and it got copied. Well, I'm sure you're familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh and the story of the flood. That was already in existence, and the people who wrote the Bible just kind of took the pieces that they wanted to and so forth. He does a good job, so I recommend the Dragons in Genesis podcast.
Okay, I will. And you said that's a podcast?
Yeah, Dragons.
Okay.
If you just look up Dragons in Genesis, you'll see it.
Great.
I wanted to ask you, I'm going to give you a quick break here from talking because I want to just read something to you, and I want to hear your response when I'm done. And if you've already, I didn't list when I was interacting with you before our podcast, for our video, I didn't mention to the exact passages, but I did want to go through these. I think I mentioned it. I'm going to go through a couple here, and I can't see your face, so I'm switching screens, so I'm not looking to see your facial reaction.
Okay.
Although you're welcome to make faces if you want to. But I want to hear what you have to say about some of these. And this is easily the tip of the iceberg for these kinds of verses.
Okay.
Exodus 21, 7-8. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. Exodus 21, 20-21. Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they're not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. Exodus 31:15. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath shall be put to death. Deuteronomy 21:18-21. If any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him, he will not even listen to them, then his father and mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of the city at the gateway of his hometown. They shall say to the elders of the city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death. You shall remove evil from your midst, and all of Israel will hear of it in fear. Exodus 23:23. I've got about 5 or 6 more here to do. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Leviticus 25:44-46. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. Leviticus 21:16-24. The Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, for the generations to come, none of your descendants who has a defect may come near to offer the food of his God. No man who has any defect may come near. No man who is blind or lame, disfigured or deformed. No man with a crippled foot or hand, or is humpback or a dwarf, or has any eye defect, or who has festering or running sores or damaged testicles. No descendant of Aaron the priest who has any defect is to come near to present the food offerings to the Lord. He has a defect. He must not come near to offer the food of his God. I am the Lord who makes them holy. Leviticus 26, I'm going to read just part of this. 26, I believe, verse 27. In spite of this, you still do not listen to me, but continue to be hostile toward me. Then in my anger, I will be hostile toward you. I'm sorry, I should have started the verse with if. If in spite of this, you still do not listen to me, then in my anger, I will be hostile toward you, and I will punish you for your sins 7 times over. You will eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. And he ends that verse with, I will abhor you. Numbers 5, 11 through 31. This actually, we're just going to do highlights of this. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful, and if feelings of jealousy come over her husband, and he suspects that she is impure, then he is to take his wife to the priest. The priest shall bring her and have her stand before the Lord. He shall take some holy water in a clay jar and put some dust from the tabernacle floor, into the water. After the priest has had the woman stand before the Lord, he shall loosen her hair and place in her hands the reminder offering, the grain offering for jealousy, while he himself holds the bitter water that brings a curse. Then the priest shall put the woman under an oath and say, if no other man has had relations with you, and you have not gone astray and become impure while married to your husband, may this bitter water that brings a curse not harm you. But if you've gone astray while married to your husband, and you have made yourself impure, may the Lord cause you to become a curse among your people, when he makes your womb miscarry and your abdomen swell. 1 Samuel 15, 2-3. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel, in opposing them on the way when they came out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them. Kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Joshua 10:40, I'll end with this part here. So Joshua struck the whole land, the hill country and the Negev and the lowland and the slopes, and all their kings. He left none remaining, but devoted to destruction all that breathed, just as the Lord commanded. Those are some harsh verses. Again, tip of the iceberg. We could go on over that for probably another 30 minutes.
Oh my gosh, yes.
When you read those,
Yeah.
2 questions for now. Number 1, did those get discussed as you were growing up in church? And number 2, what's your response to them now?
No, they sure didn't. I could probably respond to each one individually. First, I would say one of the things I learned this year in reading is that the Bible was created by man in a specific time for a specific purpose. So they are limited, people who are writing this book, even if they were God-inspired, by their surroundings regarding slavery, etc. I think I don't want to get political, Tim, but here we are with the patriarchy. And I think that this is truly one of the biggest problems in our country, is how we utilize this book, even in our government. As a mother of a child who is Black, all of the slavery references dig deep, and not going political, and yeah. So it hurts to read those things, and I don't.
Well, I've read I've read a lot of answers to people who talk about how to explain the genocide or the slavery.
Okay.
There's a lot of misogyny. There is another verse, if I can find it here, that this is probably one of my ones that makes me cringe the most. Numbers 31, 17-18, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man intimately, but all the girls who have not known a man intimately, you may spare for yourselves. What that could be, child brides or worse, who knows. I personally doubt any of that actually happened. I think it was actually probably, I mean, it may have
You-
happened in history, but in terms of that actual story,
Okay.
I doubt that it was actual history. I think it was probably part of a foundation story to intimidate other cultures and to
Sure.
express things like domination. But whether or not any of it or all of it happened in history, just the fact that you have a book where God's saying this stuff, and yes, you could go to Bible college and get a PhD in theology and find some ways to explain it, but the Bible was always described to me as a book. It's a book for the world. God loves the world. He wants everyone to read this book. And so people, that have very little education or very little exposure to this stuff, people that are going to get it freshly translated in their language in the tribe, they have no exposure to massive theology books and historical background. They just read this stuff and it says, kill everyone.
Yeah.
Kill the little kids, but spare the girls. That's in this book. And it's like, to quote someone else here, I'll quote him in a second. You have verses that say very clear instructions about what to eat and not to eat, like don't eat shellfish, and how to shave your hair. Don't weave two kinds of cloth together. A God person who can clearly say, I want you to eat this, but not that. But he can't say, don't own people. He can't say, women are important.
Yeah.
And I know people say, oh, well, God elevates women compared to the rest of the cultures. I'm sorry. It's not. That is such a lame excuse. Women are not treated right. Even you look at the New Testament and you look at 1 Corinthians 14, 34 to 35. The women are to keep silent in the churches. They are not permitted to speak. They're to subject themselves, just as the law also says. If they desire to learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home. Again, it is improper for a woman to speak in church. It's in the New Testament.
Yeah.
When you read this stuff, would you want your kids thinking this is a good God? I mean, when you listen to that, does it sound like a good God to you? Would you want to
No,
pass
it
that on?
doesn't. It doesn't. And I purposefully didn't raise my kids to be immersed in this book, because I think the book is one option. I think it's one option. There's so many, and I think, I don't know, to subscribe wholly to a book that details genocide and rape and slavery, it's just
It's crazy. And how do the modern evangelical church, from my experience, they by and large ignore the
Correct.
bad passages. You agree? Okay. It seems like they focus primarily on a couple concepts. Maybe you could probably put it in 10 or 20 words. Grace, forgiveness, hope, glory, the cross, the resurrection, just the hopeful stuff.
Yeah.
Do you feel like as you got exposed to the fuller picture of all of it over the years, do you feel like it was fair? Or there was, I'm not trying to bait this question, but
No, it's okay.
would you agree that it seems unfair to not tell people the full story of what they're believing?
Definitely, yes. Yes, absolutely. I think, but I don't blame my parents or grandparents. I mean, that's all they knew too. So I definitely don't have any sort of ill will toward them for doing what they believed was the right thing.
Yeah.
And oh man, I mean, one of those passages you read about Sundays, my grandparents, we weren't even allowed. Like maybe they would take us window shopping or something, but they wouldn't even make a purchase on a Sunday. The Sundays were for, I mean, it was very strict. When you were in your dress, you were dressed, it was a whole thing. I forget where I was going with this, Tim. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Did you ever see that movie, Chariots of Fire?
No.
It's a great movie, great soundtrack, very classic. It's, if I remember correctly, it's about a long time ago, a man in England who was a very fast runner, and it was an issue where he got in a conundrum because the Olympic race he was basically a dead ringer to win was going to be held on a Sunday. And I forget if I may be misremembering it, but I remember it at least started with the quote where they're all exiting church, and this little boy's running down the path, and the guy that's the star of the movie, he corrects the boy. He's like, "Should you be running on the Sabbath, little boy?" And something like that. And it's an amazing how it's infiltrated our culture so much.
Yes. I have a very big problem with that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask next about something called epistemology.
Yes.
Have you heard of the idea of street epistemology?
Have I heard of the idea of what?
Street epistemology?
No.
Okay. Well, basically just focusing on the question of when someone makes a belief claim, like if you were to come up to someone and say, tell me your deep beliefs. What's true to you? And they would tell you, and then you'd say, hopefully in a very kind way, can you tell me how you know that's the truth? And as you look at that in your own heart and your own journey, where do you go from here? You've told us kind of where you've been, a little bit of where you're at. Where do you go from here with determining how do you know what's true for ultimate reality?
So I have to go with my gut. It's all I have. It is some people would say that's the God in you. Is it? Maybe.
Do you mean like God, as God in you, as in God is speaking to you, or as if people were God
in you,
like a divineness inside of you?
Yes.
Okay.
I tend to oh, here they're home.
Good.
Andrew's home.
Hey, Andrew. That's fine. I've got background noise in my videos all the time.
Okay.
So
Okay.
no problem.
Mike will probably grab him the iPad and then we'll be all set.
Sounds good.
I tend to not want to make any absolute statements. Like I don't want to say that because all I know is that there's a lot I don't know, and I'm willing to learn. And initially, I think I was looking for the truth, and now I think maybe that's not important. Maybe everyone's truth is different, and maybe it's a matter of what is right for me. That's the most important for me. That's very unbiblical. But here we are. So I can't say absolutely where I'm headed with this. I don't know.
Right. Can I ask you? I wanted to go into a section. It's related to the question of how do you know what to believe in, and part of that is just, for me at least, is plain getting all the facts.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of my journey has been about. If you look at your mind and your your faith as a table full of facts, obviously someone's going to put the Bible in there and say that's a fact, and someone's going to say my experience, and maybe not a table of facts, but it's a table of your resources for how to figure out what to believe. Do you what are you uncovering? You mentioned some of it, but just in terms of big ideas, what are you uncovering that you're kind of saying this starts to change things, and in fact it might combined, at least together, it might change everything?
Yeah.
What information's come into your attention that you think this probably or even definitely should have been shared with me as I was growing up?
Yeah, the Bible. So I wish I had known. I think I actually remember the day, because one of our neighbors was christened, that the Catholics had more books in their Bible. How come? Who decided which books I am to have in my Bible, and who decided? I mean, I was 7. I remember this. That was never answered beyond they're wrong and we're right.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, obviously they're wrong.
Huh?
Obviously they're wrong.
Obviously they're wrong.
Because they are. That's
Everyone
the
else.
circle.
Everyone else is. Yeah.
Do you know at this point, have you dove into that whole question of, I guess what you might call canonicity?
Only a little, not a lot. I think you're a lot further on this journey than I am. I have, just little bits. And the thing
that's great, though.
Honestly, the thing that blew my mind and changed everything for me was that docuseries about where, and then all of a sudden there's all these people who do believe in God and do have a relationship with God and know that the Bible isn't inerrant and wasn't even intended to be taken literally. Yeah. And so I'm still in that whole mind blow up situation. I'm still there. I'm in that cloud.
Right. Gotcha. Well, let me ask you this. There's a whole bunch of things I wanted to possibly go over here, but we'll touch on at least some of them. Do you feel? Oh, you know what? Let me do this instead. I meant to start this with an icebreaker, and so this would be. I don't want to not ask it. Are you more of a coffee or tea drinker? And if you were in a coffee shop, what would you order?
Yeah, I am a coffee drinker. And it would depend on the coffee shop. Usually I'd like, if I go somewhere special for a coffee, I'd like cinnamon coffee.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Yeah, we do the chai tea a lot, which I know has a little bit of cinnamon flavor. Okay, so first let me ask you this. When you're looking at what you just said, the whole issue of the extra books, has anyone ever in church explained to you where the Bible came from?
No.
Okay. Do you feel like that's an important question that they should kind of clarify?
Yeah.
I can't emphasize enough how strongly I feel about that issue myself, because when you look at it, there are over 40 different Gospels. Over 40. And we know for sure that there are a lot of books that just got destroyed because they'll be referenced, but we don't have the copy, but they're talked about. There are at least 40 Gospels. There are at least 6 different books of Acts. There are so many epistles that other people wrote, and a lot of them they wrote in the name of people that we would recognize, like epistles of Paul, epistles of Barnabas, the books supposedly by Isaiah. You have, or at least about Isaiah. I need to brush up on some of my details, but I'm kind of like you, where I know a lot, but once you learn a lot, like, actually I don't know much. There's a lot more to learn. But a book about Isaiah for sure, maybe by him, and endless books. And there's a whole, I guess what you might call like a black box of time. If you say, am I visually here? Am I starting? If I go here, does that look right to you?
Sure.
I know in video you kind of have to you have to switch yourself around, right? I would go like this and go that way. I think you have to go this and that way. I don't know. Yeah. But there's a whole black box of time where you would say, all right, if Christ lived, then he died around 30 AD, give or take. Right. And when do the first books appear? Well, there's several decades later.
Yes.
Several decades. And at that point, though, you have a lot of other books also coming up at the same time. But if the average lifespan at that time was about just under 50 years old, so you're talking about almost an entire generation.
Yes.
And it's like, where are the books?
Right.
Where are the books? And
Yes.
why are the disciples, like the books, the Gospels aren't they're not the names that they're given. It's not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's not who wrote them. We don't know who wrote them.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't the actual disciples just give us the Gospels?
Great question.
But then if you add on to it, and you may already know this, but the Gospels weren't the first books written. They're the first books in the New Testament. The epistles were written first, like Paul. And then the Gospels were added. Well, when you read Paul, and there's a lot of them that look like they're forgeries, but if you look at least there's 7 of them that they think are definitely Paul. or whoever, is being called Paul, they never talk about stuff in the Gospels. Like if Jesus talks about parables, parable this, parable that, where are the parables in Paul?
Yes.
Like if this is Jesus' primary, does stuff like that get presented to you at all in church?
At church? No. No, I mean, but again, I only went 3 months before that. I'm sure that a UCC doesn't talk about, I don't think any church talks about that. I think that's individual exploration. I mean, maybe we should make a church.
Exactly. Let me ask this. What do you feel like you have been taught, if anything, about mystery cults that were in existence at the time of Christ?
Nothing. I know nothing about mystery cults.
Okay. Has that term ever come up to you before?
No.
Okay. I don't want to turn this into a long situation where I'm going over this as if this were the main course for this video, but we might make a video on it another time. But there were other mystery cults. There were groups that basically believed in dying and rising savior gods. And I know if you just YouTube this, dying and rising savior gods compared to Christ, you'll get a whole bunch of apologists who will lie through their teeth and say to you, there's nothing to this. I mean, they are absolutely flat out lying, and they're not people that are thoroughly vetted in Hellenistic and Egyptian and Greek, and Roman history and mythology. They're not Egyptologists and all that. They're just kind of spouting stuff that someone else tells you. But when you look at it, this stuff is absolutely real. And I just want to give you a couple of examples.
Oh, I'm definitely interested.
So dying and rising savior gods, some of them are what we would call personal savior gods, whereas there were some gods that were more about the community and the farmland. We want to worship God so he'll give us good crops or not have flooding. Yes. They turn in the couple hundred years before Christ, so to speak, they turn into an option where they're more of a personal savior god. You can personally get saved, go to heaven. All of them are called a son or a daughter of God. All of them die or undergo a major death or suffering. They undergo death or major suffering. They all obtain victory over death, which they share with their followers, and they all have stories. They're all not real people, but they all have stories set on earth in human history, such as Osiris. That was an Egyptian cult that spread all over the Mediterranean. People, get this, they were baptized into his death and resurrection to get saved in the afterlife.
Wow.
Adonis from the Syrian cult, same thing. Romulus was a Roman state god, but his death and resurrection were celebrated in annual passion plays. Zalmoxis, Thracian dying and rising god, his death and resurrection assured followers of salvation, especially if they partake in a common ritual meal. Inanna, going back earlier, a crucified Sumerian goddess, she descends to hell, her naked corpse is nailed up, and 3 days later, she resurrects and ascends to glory.
Wow.
Mithra was a Persian god. He does not follow the pattern of the dying and rising god, but he was a personal savior god. Every culture in the Mediterranean was doing this. So you have a group of people who are all over and from every angle, temples everywhere, saying we have state gods that we have to honor, but we also have these gods, and we get initiated into them, and they would have secrets. And are you familiar with the idea of the mystery part of it?
No.
Okay. I'm going to give a brief summary, and I want to get back to some questions, and I apologize, I'm kind of dragging this on. But this is the kind of information, before I say what I'm going to say, this is the stuff that I feel like they need to tell people.
That would be nice.
So they had, and I may be botching, to my other fellow atheists, please correct me, I'm sure I'm botching some of this, but they had a cosmology, a belief in the heavens above them.
Yeah.
Where they believed that there were, and especially with Jewish mythology, they believed that there were levels of heaven, and that there was, this is getting into more of the Gnostic, what's called Gnosticism by a lot of people, this Gnostic idea of there's a God up in heaven, way up there, but he's too pure to touch us. So there's levels of where he creates like emanations, and they come down. Eventually, one of the emanations that's really far creates the earth and so forth. And so if God wants to deal with us, he needs a demigod. He needs someone, an intermediary.
Okay.
And so there's these different stories, like in the Ascension of Isaiah, where you have a book, that the Jewish mystics of that time were very aware of, where Jesus is more like an archangel. He does come down, but not to the earth. He comes to space, and he gets crucified by Satan and the demons in outer space. There were Christian sects teaching this. And you have Philo of Alexandria, who wrote around 60 AD. He talks about this pre-Christian Jewish beliefs in these angels, and it describes it as this person as the firstborn son of God, the celestial image of God, God's agent of creation, and God's celestial high priest, which is almost exactly quoted in the book of Colossians. It's almost exactly what it is.
Wow.
When you look at this, what they appear to be doing for the mystery side of it is they appear to be saying, we have visions. Like Paul says in one of his books, he says, I was taken up to the third heaven. They have visions of what's happening in these realms above them. And some of it involves very bizarre numerology stuff. Some of it involves keywords to know how to get the angels to let you through in your visions and so forth, or when you die. So they get all these things, and they have mysteries, and they say, if you come into our cult, you will, if you're baptized and you eat our ritual meal, you become a common brother or sister in our new family. We will tell you the mysteries of our cult, and you will understand, and through this information and the visions, you will be promised an afterlife in heaven. You come along, you bring that where everyone's thinking this, and the only missing piece that Christianity didn't have was the idea of a sacrificial lamb. You need the blood atonement. You add it to the story, and you have Jewish mystery cult.
Wow.
It's exactly what everyone would have done if you could have added the blood sacrifice part of it.
Wow.
Does stuff like that, I want to ask what's your response, but I want to be more specific. Does it sound like that's the kind of information that if you can validate it, obviously, anything we talk about, you'd want to validate, but if you could validate it and then dive deeper and say, that doesn't sound right. Does that come across as like something that you'd say, I got to understand, does this relate to Christianity? Because it sounds like it might. And if it does sound like it, what would that do to your faith if you confirm that this sounds like it's copying the mystery cult tendency?
Well, I'm not sure that it would change where I am now. So because my faith is not reliant on a book or on or Jesus, or I think it's much more abstract. My faith. I'm not even sure that that's kind of a weird word for me to even use.
Can you tell me more about the abstractness part?
So
what
I think,
does it mean to you?
I think that the God that I believe in is energy. It's universal energy. I believe that prayer is your energy. I don't know that I have much more concrete than that. I'm not basing at this point anything biblically at all. So none of that surprises me, or of what you've just said, or, well, it surprises me, but not totally.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't change what I feel, which feeling, in fact, I don't know.
Do you still believe in, is there any parts of Christianity that you would say you still adhere to, such as heaven or any other parts that you feel it's worth keeping?
So I think that, well, where I stood coming into this today on heaven was kind of a loosely held belief that we were intended to create heaven on earth by following Jesus's behaviors. I think that's heaven. I'm not sure. I'm not certain about an afterlife. I don't know what happens to our souls when this is done. I'd like to believe they continue to exist as energy, but I think I believe the intention of heaven was to be created here. I don't believe heaven was intended to be used as an abstract. Does that make sense?
It does. I would say, as a follow-up, does that frighten you that there might not be an afterlife?
No.
Does it disappoint you?
No.
Would you want to live forever if you could?
No.
Really?
Really?
I've heard other atheists say that. I've never heard a Christian say that, and I personally would want to live forever.
You would? Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would want to live forever and ever. I would, if I could live. I feel like I love life. I love living. I love learning. I feel like I just want to. Life's such an adventure and there's just so much to soak in. I want to be a master of all the skills and have hobbies, and you can't. There's not enough life or lifetimes to master everything, and
no.
The whole idea of being a Renaissance person, where you're just a master of so many beautiful things, and I know I'll die long before I can master even a fraction of what I want to. But when you obviously at some point you did expect to go to heaven.
Yeah.
When you entertain the idea that might not be part of your future or anyone's future, or certainly hell for that matter, at least. Did that change your day-to-day life? Like how do changes like that affect the way you know?
No, I've always had a strong sense of self, which I know is not something that was appreciated. So no, it didn't change. I was always going to do what I was going to do regardless.
Right.
So no, nothing changed. I'd say the only thing that makes me even a little bit sad about the possibility that there's no heaven. And again, I don't know what's true. No, I mean, does anyone? I don't think so. Is not getting to see my Graham again. That would be the only enticement for me.
Yeah, absolutely. When I deconverted about a year ago, and it was shocking to me to realize this. It was like a fire hydrant opening up, all within about a span of an hour. Just the ramifications of it hit very quickly.
Okay.
And it felt like, you ever seen The Matrix?
I've not seen The Matrix. I'm a terrible movie person. I don't watch a lot of movies.
Well, there's this one. They basically are. It's like the whole world is computerized world where everyone's plugged into this computer, and they think they're walking around and doing their jobs, but they're actually just in a pod with their brains doing the work. They're not. It's not real. Well, some of them have escaped, but because when they have been plugged in, they have this little spot in the back of their heads where they have a little, like a computer interface, and so now that they've escaped, they still have it physically in their heads, and they can plug in their own computers to just do stuff with their brains. And so this one scene where this man Neo, who's escaped, he first gets this experience and taste of what it means to have this happen. They teach him jujitsu like in 10 seconds, and he's like a master jujitsu person, and it's all, and you can see his face like, whoa, and they're like, whoa, is it too much? And he's like, no, I want more. And it's so weird, but when it hits you so fast, you're like, this is crazy.
Yeah. I'm still stuck there. That this is crazy. And but I think having unsubscribed longer ago than you, so I think we're probably about the same age.
Yeah, 43.
Give or take. So you probably were in much deeper than me when this happened to you. So I have the utmost respect for you and sympathy, because I know how it feels. Yeah. It
does sound like you've taken some steps that, like, I was like, on a chart, it would have been like, and it probably was, and it probably was a little bit slower, and I didn't know it, but it felt like that. whereas it feels like you're kind of like already moving in the direction.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
It feels like some of these wouldn't hardly hit you at all. They would
No.
hardly hit you at all.
Yeah, I think just understanding that the Bible is not the center of the universe, that was just the end for me.
Huh.
Yeah.
Got so many things, so many directions I'm thinking of taking this, but I want to not get too far off the main track. The stuff I mentioned about, the mystery cults that were happening,
Yeah.
the other books, the black box of time where we don't know what happened for several decades. No one's writing about it. When they do
There's
write,
literally no one that wrote about anything?
yeah, well, that was something else I wanted to ask about. Is were you aware that there are no historians, and there were historians back then that recorded a lot. They recorded all kinds of stuff, even stuff you'd think that's not that significant. There are, I don't know, 4 or 5 people that Christians would say, oh no, that so-and-so historian mentioned it. But when you actually dig deep into it, you can see that several of them were talking about something else. That's not the right Jesus, it's a different Jesus, totally separate. Or you can see that the passage about Jesus was added hundreds of years later to the text, like of the man named Josephus. And so you pretty much figure out what all these 4 or 5 people that might have been historians that talked about Jesus, that they weren't actually, you can't cite them. They're not it's not a correct cite. So you'd say, okay, well, what's left? And the answer is literally there is no historian that ever mentions Jesus.
No, I had no idea. That's amazing. That's amazing to me.
I mean, and that's why I say this, and that's literally just the start of Jesus, what we call Jesus mythicism. That Jesus was a myth. He was what's called euhemerized, where you took someone that's got a God story of sorts going for him or her, and then you weave it into history and say, no, this person started in history. This, because there's some mythology that it seems like they kind of acknowledge. This is mythology. This wasn't from some man or woman that slowly turned into a god. But this is like, it appears that they started with Jesus as similar to the mystery cults. I've been reading it, just as a quick side, Dionysius. I don't know if you knew this, but did you know how much Luke and Acts and some of their Gospels, they're based on Homer and other Greek epics?
I looked into that because I saw one of your other videos.
Okay.
So I did look into that, and I was quite surprised. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Even last night I was up late. This stuff keeps me up at night, literally.
Same.
Like the Euripides, the Bacchae. In the Bacchae, there was a man named Pentheus, who is an example of a bad disciple. He doesn't follow Dionysius correctly, and Dionysius pretty much tricks him into coming and seeing some of the people that are in this crazed trance, God trance, that he's they're kind of cursed, but they do crazy things. And so Pentheus goes to see these people, and he can't quite see them, and so he climbs a tree. And you probably can guess where I'm going with this. He climbs a tree. And so you have it in the Gospels and the story of Zacchaeus, the story of a good man who climbs a tree. And of course, he's the example of the good follower. Well, what were the followers of, or the Bacchae called in Greek? Bacchaeus. They were called Bacchaeus.
Are you serious?
Here you get Zacchaeus climbing a tree. It's like, and stuff like that is endless. It is absolutely endless. I'm working on several presentations that are going to try to go through this. I need to understand it all. I need to verify it. I'll double check it all, make sure it's not just someone making stuff up. But this stuff, it's like Luke Acts, I think, from what I've been told, is based on or a response to the Iliad and the Odyssey. And even if you were to not have seen that, if we hadn't seen that as researchers, there are just, I don't know if you knew this, but there are Greek quotes, like Greek poet and Greek philosopher quotes all over the New Testament. And I don't just mean that section of Acts where Paul's preaching to the philosophers, where he literally says, I'm quoting your poets. I mean, just woven into the epistles.
Wow.
You just don't even see it. It's all over Plato, Socrates. It's all over the New Testament. And unless you know that, you just think you're God, God's giving us his word. But it's like, if God is the master communicator. Why does he need to quote Plato and Socrates and Homer and Euripides? Why does he need to quote them? It blows my mind. But
It is. I mean, there's no other description besides mind blowing. At once you, yeah.
do you know about Pythagoras?
No, Pythagorean theorem. That's all I know.
Yes. Well, this is something and I was just telling my friend Joel and Derek about this. I am at the very beginning, so I could not go deep into this. But so Pythagoras was, he had a cult around him as well, and it was very mathematical but very religious as well. Pythagoras was arrogant beyond arrogant. You literally had to spend like 5 years with a vow of silence in his school before you could actually have permission to talk to him. It was very serious, aggressive, but he was brilliant, arguably in some ways, and he loved numbers. He would do math in ways that would be like, I don't even know what you just said. It's just like mind blown, not in the sense of I understand it, that's really cool, but like, what are you saying? Say it again another 1,000 times and I might get it. But he would weave all kinds of crazy things about the universe into these numbers. And in this one story, which I'm going to get wrong here, I'm sure, but he goes to some fishermen who are fishing. And he makes some kind of bet with them, I believe, where he says, if I can tell you how many fish you're about to pull up out of your net, will you put them back? And they agree. And so it ends up that the number is 153, and they have to put the fish back because he accurately predicted how many they would pull out. Well, 153 is a very crucial number for Pythagoras, and I'll go into another video about why. But 153 is a major number for him.
Okay.
And so John 21, Jesus is out, by the side of the lake, I believe, and the disciples are there. Jesus is resurrected, and he calls to them, and they don't recognize him. And he says, have you caught any fish? And they say no. And so he says, let down your nets. And they do. And I'll let you guess how many fish they caught. It's like, why are we referencing Pythagoras in the God of the Universe's book?
That's amazing.
And he's all over the New Testament. I'm just discovering it's pretty mind-blowing. I guess let me take us back into your story specifically. Where do you go from here?
Yeah.
You know a lot more than a lot of people. You're questioning a lot more than people. You're a lot better than me at saying, I couldn't say this sounds wrong when you did. You said it a lot earlier. So you're a lot of steps ahead of me where I was. Where do you go from here, though? Because you're kind of in a different spot than where I took it. Yeah,
I am in a different spot than you two. I think that to me, there's an appeal in not becoming atheistic. I think there's an appeal in still believing, while not believing that the Bible is the truth, right? I think there's still an appeal in believing in a God, and I think that there's still value in that for me, and I think that's okay. And so learning, I'm definitely interested in the history of the Bible. I'm definitely interested in learning about the canons. So it's just a little bits at a time for me. Obviously, I'm a lot of my energy right now is in here. Just like you, it sounds like a lot of my free time. Which we don't seem to have much of with all these kids, right?
Can you tell me more about the benefit? And I'm not questioning you at all on this. I'm just curious, because I've heard people say something kind of similar to you, and I've also heard people say that they have, escaped and they're done with the Bible and God of any kind. They're done with God talk. That God is not real to them, and it would be as good as talking about the tooth fairy being real, and so they're just done with it. But there are people that would say, I wish I could go back.
Okay.
Whether it's for the sense of community and church or for the peace. What keeps you in a belief in some kind of God, and what would you foresee, if you could guess, what would you foresee happening as you investigate? Do you think it would become more like nebulous in the sense of like, I'm not into the God of the Bible per se anymore, or at least in the same way I was, but that doesn't change my belief in the higher power that's, controlling me and energizing my life. Or do you think is there a third option, or how do you think that could evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I resonate more with that second option for sure. I mean, I don't think he's controlling me or everything. I just think it's an existence of some sort. How does it add value to my life? I think it could be very easy to fall into hopelessness, and I can see where that would be particularly problematic for me with my mental health in general. I love the idea of the interconnectedness of, sorry, my husband's talking to our neighbor, of God, of us all being God's children, belonging to one another, here to serve one another. I think there's a lot of value in trying to live with certain values that maybe you don't have to believe in God to have. But for me, somehow they're connected, and maybe that will change.
Yeah, well, that is an accusation that's leveled a lot against atheists, and a lot of it is honestly, it's a question of where does your morality come from then, and some of it is they're being etymologically or semantically is more the word, semantically deceptive in how they're phrasing some of these questions. But when you get to the core of it, they're just asking, why do you as an atheist say it's wrong to kill someone? Because if there's no God that's giving you a law that says don't kill someone, then it's technically not wrong in some official sense to kill someone, right? And they would level that against atheists, and I don't want to go down that rabbit trail per se this time, but it is true that there's some questions that come up if you do choose to go all out, completely out of it.
Sure. I mean, I guess I wasn't thinking about it so Ten Commandment-y. I was thinking more about just feeding the poor, healing the sick, do unto others. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I think from an evolutionary perspective, that definitely becomes a topic to address, is if it sounds like this is about survival of the fittest and the strongest, and the weak just perish, why would you care about the weak? And so there's definitely some confusion that people bring to the table, especially with evolution. I wanted to ask you, and maybe we'll wrap it up after this one.
Sure.
Where do you see yourself with the topic of evolution? And
I believe in evolution.
You
definitely
do?
believe in evolution.
Did you grow up believing in that?
No, that was a dirty word.
What changed your mind?
Science. There was no. I mean, it's literally proven. I take the evidence in front of me, and sometimes we don't have all the right evidence, right? So, but I do currently believe in evolution.
So would you agree that we have a common ancestor? All life has a common ancestor, meaning we basically come from the microbes in the water.
Yes.
Whatever they would. Okay.
Yep.
So if we could go back far enough, there wasn't Adam and Eve. There were people that looked like Neanderthals, and there were people that looked like. Okay.
That's. I mean, could I change that view? Absolutely. But yes, today here, yes.
How about the age of the Earth and the universe? Did that change for you? I assume.
Yeah. Yep. We grew up believing that it was 4,000 to 6,000 years old or something, right? And
yeah, I think I was told like 6 to 10, but yeah.
6 to 10. And that's easily disproven also.
Mm-hmm. Was that unsettling when you discovered that?
I think that as a teenager, when these things all kind of came apart, it was like, figures. So, no.
Well, it was a revelation to me. I knew all about evolution's claims, I rejected them, of course. And literally in that hour that I deconverted, I was like, that's probably true. I mean, I hadn't like thought through it too deeply, but it's like, if there's no God, or at least not a God that's ever revealed himself, itself, there's no God, then there was no creation. Adam and Eve, you know, it's funny when you deconvert, you're kind of saying I'm walking away from a certain faith, but when you deconstruction kind of keeps on happening.
Yeah.
And some people use them interchangeably, but deconverting is like an act, like I'm deconverting. I'm no longer associating myself with the belief in that worldview and that God. But deconstruction is like an ongoing process to me. And so you kind of have to almost like, you have to unlearn stuff. You have to think, what am I bringing to the table? Like, am I, even though I've said technically I know that's not true, I'm an atheist, is there any part of my worldview that's still syncing up with this and saying, I'm still thinking of this as if there was an Adam and Eve. I'm still thinking of this as if, and you have to kind of constantly check yourself and say, what biases am I bringing to the table?
Absolutely, yes. And we're both new to this, and I would say, let's give ourselves a lot of grace and a lot of room to grow, because there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that we can claim to know anything, absolutely, certainly.
Can I ask on that note, and I'll ask this as my last wrap-up question, the issue of rationality and logic, the issue of, say a couple of keywords here, circular reasoning, the issue of errors in our thinking, the issues of going back to street epistemology, how do you know what you know, the idea of critical thinking, being honest with yourself and with the evidence, listening to opposing viewpoints, to taking a much more proactive and strong role in your own beliefs as opposed to just inheriting them, being fully aware of all the paradigms around us, including, opposing paradigms, the whole idea of cognitive dissonance, the idea of separating yourself mentally from what's maybe a vested interest, being able to scrutinize issues to say, I really don't care what the outcome is as much as possible. I just want to let the facts say what they say. I want to have an accurate picture of history, of all this logically valid conclusions, suspicious logic, all these things. And, we could go on and make a list of probably a couple hundred things that relate to it. It sounds like you've gone through that process already. It sounds like you went through it before me, but how do you get from, I believe what I've been taught, these people love me, I can't question them, I wouldn't question them, I know they're right, to, all those hoops that I went through with those keywords, you went through, it sounds like long before I did. How do you get yourself out of the block that says, this must be right? Like I have questions, I have doubts. Granted, I might need a stronger faith, but at the end of the day, the Bible's word of God, God is on the throne, Christ is his son, he is the king, he is the ruler, he is the sovereign Lord, he is the savior, rescuer of souls, and he has chosen to reveal his glory through the gospel, to redeem people unto himself. That whole message, which is just, as a Christian, you just cannot say, you can't question that. You cannot say,
no.
How do you start to open the doors that say, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm right, but maybe I'm wrong? Or at least to say, how right are you? Are you 0 to 100? Like if you say, I'm 90% sure Christianity is right, but I'm open. That's not what I ever thought. I thought it's 100% or it's 0. How do you open the door to say, like to say, I need to deal with cognitive dissonance directly?
Ooh, I don't know if I had to do that, Tim. I don't think I was faced with this wave of information the same way you were. Like you said, you deconverted in an hour. It wasn't like that for me. It was decades, So I'm not sure I had to confront all of those things all at once.
It's much more gradual. Yeah.
It was much more gradual. And I've always been always been very forgiving of myself. So it was easy for me to say, oh, I was wrong. That was easy. I like having an
Yeah.
open mind. I feel like the more we learn, the better we can be as people. And it is my number one complaint is people with closed minds. It's really unfortunate, and we have so much to learn from one another.
When you do have one-on-one conversations or small group conversations with people that are in that category, do you ever find anything kind of breaking through any walls, or is it more, no? Does that disturb you that if certain chips had fallen different ways, that you could have been that person?
I don't know that I ever could have been.
Even with specific kind of upbringing and indoctrination?
Yeah, I think I was always too willful.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I never felt that I fit in quite the same way everyone else seemed to easily accept things. I didn't. Was it because I was a reader? Maybe. I don't know. There's just always been something in me.
That's fascinating, because you get that concept from some atheists and even from some Christians that comment on atheists, that there's just some people that look like they're made, so to speak, to just, they can't believe it. They just can't believe this stuff. And it doesn't matter. I remember listening to a lady named, you probably haven't heard of her, D.M. Murdoch, or Acharya. She would call herself Acharya. She's passed now, but she was very deep into an issue we haven't touched on, which is Astro Theology. Do you know the term Astro Theology?
Listen to you, Astro Theology. No, I don't.
Well, I won't go into it beyond just describing it, but basically that a lot of the concepts and stories are not stories, just even whether literal or just in the sense of parable, but they're actually directly reflective of what's happening in the stars.
Amazing.
So, for example, when you see like the sun gods were very prominent in that world.
Yes.
Samson, we know the story of Samson. Well, the sun, when it's quiet, doesn't have solar flares. And people observe the sun and they notice this. They also noticed times when there was a lot of activity and it looked like there were hairs coming off of the sun. The sun had solar flares. So there was this dynamic that occurred in a lot of the stories of baldness. Baldness, like, for a man, was like when the sun was weak and quiet, and then when it got explosive and powerful, the hair would be growing. And so you take Samson and they cut his hair, and what happens? He loses all of his power. When it grows back, he gets his power back. The story of Elisha, and I think it's the 42 children. You know that story?
42 children, no.
Elisha was a bald prophet, and he comes across some children. I believe it was 42 or 43 of them, and they start mocking him and saying, "Ha ha, you're a bald man." So he calls out two bears. He prays for God, I think, to curse them, or he curses them in the name of God. And two bears come out, two she-bears come out of the forest and devour the 42 children.
Oh my God.
At which point he keeps going on his journey. He doesn't stop and bury the kids. He doesn't call the community and say, we need to weep or this. He just keeps walking. So you think, well, that's a horrible story. Well, again, go back to the Astro Theology, baldness. He is a bald man. There are constellations, I forget which one, that reflect two bears. And there's something I need to learn, where it's about the 42 or 43 stars.
Oh my God.
Something like that. It's a lot to do with equinoxes, the sun, well, anyway, going back to the point, Acharya, she mentioned that she, from an early age, just couldn't stand church. Like, she was like, she couldn't get out quick enough. I was listening to someone else recently said the same thing. Like, I couldn't get out quick enough. This just sounded stupid from day one. And other people are like, no, this sounds actually really profoundly real. And I have nothing in me that wants to leave. And it's strange that I was the second person for the longest time, but then it makes you question, like, why wasn't I more like that? Or like your story, like, I couldn't say to myself, this doesn't sound right. That was not a phrase that could enter my mind. It sounds like you could, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there were periods, I would say, where I had subscribed much more strongly to everything, but they were definitely brief. And yeah. No. So I think it can make a difference where you end up for sure, and how your deconstruction journey goes. Yeah, I in the beginning I had something I wanted to say, but I forget now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. My brain is like.
We'll wrap up slowly here in the next minute or two, and then maybe it'll come back to you.
I feel a lot of pain for our world, and I wish that we could all open our minds a little bit.
I know you don't want to get political, but I just, as a surface comment, I think that's such a big part of what's going on, is just the idea of so many people claiming God is on their side. And it's like, if we could get rid of this and start to see ourselves more as a human race, and as we're not different political groups. We do have different opinions, but I think if you were to take God out of the equation for so many of these discussions, it would change so radically. And I'm guilty of it. I didn't ever make strong political statements before, so I didn't have much to retract, which is great.
Well, that's good. I'm embarrassed about some of the stuff I have out there, that's for sure.
Yeah. I would love to see, and I mean, I know the Christians always feel like they're the ones that are being oppressed, this whole persecution complex, but it's like, how many Christian or Catholic presidents in a row have we had? Like, I believe everyone. Like, yeah, like when we have 42, whatever it is, 42 presidents in a row that are atheist, then we'll talk about persecution. Yeah. Let's have 250 years of atheist presidents, and then we'll come back and talk about, we'll do pros and cons then.
Yes. Can't we all just be humanists?
Yeah. Let me ask this as an ending question. If you think of your other point, maybe you can weave it in. Do you hear stories of other people deconverting at all? Either friends or just YouTube people?
Yes, now I do. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups of people who are deconverting. We all listen to similar podcasts and read similar authors. And I'm sure that's part of why I haven't gotten where you are. I'm kind of, I guess, like attracts like, right? So I'm looking for the people who are maybe even priests, maybe even pastors, ordained, but have had these experiences and have this different perspective. That's where I feel most comfortable right now. And it seems like it can go one of two ways. It definitely, and I respect it all because I can definitely see.
Yeah, that's just, yeah, I feel like it helped me a lot, especially when you listen to people who would have, you'd consider people that are well known, or at least in Christian circles.
Sure.
For example, I grew up kind of admiring Francis Schaeffer. Did you ever hear that term?
Francis Schaeffer?
Yeah, his son, Frank, deconverted.
Oh, okay.
Tony Campolo's son, Bart Campolo, deconverted and has a very strong humanist group that he does, I believe, in colleges. There's been several people that are maybe lesser known to everybody, but in certain niche circles, like Josh Harris, I Kissed Eating Goodbye.
Okay.
You ever hear his book? Hear of his book, I Kissed Eating Goodbye?
No.
He was this guy that wrote many years ago, basically trying to encourage people towards courtship and purity, and to focus more on marriage as opposed to casual dating. And it became an absolute icon and almost an idol in certain Christian subculture. And he was a rock star, and he took a church and so forth. And I think within the last couple of years, he just came out and said, I'm no longer a Christian.
Wow.
Looking to hear, I don't know if he said it yet, but I'm looking to hear the full story behind that. If it's out there, I need to find it, but I haven't seen it yet. But I look forward to hearing his deconversion, because he was a rock star to me. He was pretty cool.
Wow.
A lot of other people. Yeah.
Prediction. Franklin Graham.
Oh, you think?
He'll be the next one. He's ripe for deconversion.
He's definitely out there. It'd be good to to reel himself back in. I think there was a recent guy, I forget his name, from a Christian rock band. There's been several from Christian rock bands that just said this doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
I find a lot of value in that because it helps plug in sides of the story that maybe I haven't thought through. Because my stories, a lot of people, their response to me is like, you realize you were in a very conservative, tight Christian doctrinal belief. Like there's a lot of other kinds of Christianity. You realize that, right? And I'm like, well, I do realize it. It doesn't change the fact that you're still using the same Bible. You're still claiming there's a Jesus, and that we need to bow our knee to the authority of the Bible on some level. Doesn't really change it too much, but I've heard that some people feel like their deconversions, or at least their liberalism, you might say, went smoother because they weren't stuck in this, very conservative and strict environment. I wouldn't say mine was the strictest by any stretch. There's a lot more strict environments that I've heard of, but
there's
it was strict enough.
And so forth. But yeah, it was strict enough. Mine was strict enough too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we spent a lot more time talking about what teenage girls should be wearing to not cause our pastors to
stumble.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Than talking about personal responsibility. But yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I'll ask this before we wrap up. Did you remember what you were going to tell me? Or if not, you'll probably remember it the minute I stop recording, and then we'll have to save it for the next time.
We'll save it for next time.
Well, Lindsey, this has been awesome. It's been a great intro. I do hope to do it again. Next time, if we do it again, I'll pick some very specific topics so that we're more focused and get those to you.
Yeah.
I would love to dive into this.
Great. I would love to, too. I think we have a lot we could share. Yeah,
absolutely. And if at some point it works out, I'd love to hear more of your husband's story, either together or whenever it works out. But I haven't interviewed any couples yet, but I think it'd be neat to hear stories, people's journeys together, because that's such an important part of it. And my story, as you know, is that my wife and I are in different spots. She is a believer, I am not, and there's kids that are growing up. Little kids. And that's a whole topic, but I'd love to hear your experience with that, where you are with it, and several other topics. And also when I get my ducks in a row and get some of these presentations done so that I can present the stuff about, the Greek, Homeric epics and the mystery cults and get it more succinct. I'd love to dive into some of that after you've seen some of those and just see what you think and what you can add to it that maybe I'm missing.
Too. I'm very interested. Can you actually send me the name of that podcast? Because I already forgot it.
Yeah, sure. It's Dragon's Genesis. I'll send it to you. Okay. But yeah, there's a lot. Have you heard, by the way, of Myth Vision?
No.
There's a YouTube channel. I'll send it to you about Myth Vision.
Okay.
It's this stuff that we're talking about on steroids.
Okay. Okay.
You will, if this interests you, you will be a kid in a candy shop.
Oh dear. Okay.
Derek Lambert does an amazing job. I've got an interview with him if you've seen my previous interviews so far, but
yes.
He's the one that runs that shop.
Okay.
Great stuff. I can't say enough good about Myth Vision. I'm not looking to go that direction per se fully. I want to dive into some of that, but I also want to talk about not just the origins of Christianity, but I want to talk about our responsibilities as people who are either atheists or deconverted or whatever. What are the responsibilities in society? Like
that is what interests me most of all, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's just like when you're listening to sermons, like now that you've got the truth and the content, what's the application? Same thing.
Yes. That's what I'm here for. Yes.
Yeah. I'd love to hear you. And honestly, as much as we don't want to get political, if you've got some things that you feel like you can say without, feeling like you're, crossing any lines or offending anybody too much, I would love to dive into that. You can let me know if that becomes an option. But
I would love to. I don't want to cross lines or offend people, but I think it's really hard not to.
Yeah.
Talking about political things and Christianity right now, I feel like Christianity's been hijacked.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if I can have the freedom to add to that, Christianity has been hijacked, but I would say Christianity also needs to needs to die out. I don't know when it's going to. I expect it will, not in my lifetime. I'm sure it's probably going to last for another 500 or 1,000 years. I'm hopeful that as they come up with more documents, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi documents.
Yes, I'm very interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yes.
Yeah, well, look up Nag Hammadi stuff too. Then
Okay.
The more you learn about it, the more you realize there was a whole bunch of Christianities. People believed all kinds of stuff about Jesus. A lot of them were not anything like what we thought of. But as you get into this stuff, you just think this stuff started as mythology. It got crafted into history, and at some point, I think it's just people are going to stop ignoring it. It's kind of gotten pushed away. Like that sounds fringe, but like everything, there's fringe, and people say, oh, it's not the consensus. We think it's. Eventually, people get enough behind them that they're like, you know what? I think actually what I thought was fringe actually is the truth. Like people used to say Moses and Abraham were real. Most secular scholars now say those people didn't exist. There was no Exodus from Egypt. It didn't happen.
Right.
Well, 50, 100 years ago, that was anathema. Like, of course it happened. Now everyone's like, that's standard belief for secular scholars.
I gotta say, Tim, I think that, here we go, climate change is gonna be the catalyst here. I think that's gonna be we're up against the clock. Yes,
that's true. That's another good point. How much time do we have to correct course? But I feel like we would have, in my opinion, a better chance at making some of these course corrections if we get out of the God talk. Get the God talk off the table. Let's start looking at it from an evolutionary, scientific perspective, and let's get to work.
Or believe in God and believe He created the earth, and let's protect it. Yeah. Exactly. We can all come to the table with our beliefs and still do something about it.
Yes, absolutely. I can't agree more. And I honestly need to get more educated on how to do that ourselves.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. This has been great. I feel like we could have gone down a lot more rabbit trails. We went down more than I thought we would, but I appreciate you telling your story. And if there's any parts of that you recall later that you just think, you know what, this is an important part of it too, I'd love to, follow up, kind of hear anything that, was more in the background that you'd love to bring to the forefront. And
Great.
I appreciate you doing this because not just of your story or some of the details we went over, I feel like these discussions need to happen.
Yes.
When you're in a Christian world, you're so insular and so insulated and so blinded. Like, it's us, we're right, and it's them, and they're on the outside. And to have these discussions, no matter where you land, if you become an atheist, agnostic, whatever your thoughts are, it's like these discussions need to happen. And especially people need to be brought to the point of saying, it's okay to doubt. It's okay to not have the party line. So many people think that if I even give myself that freedom, this is so bad.
And it's against God's word.
Yeah, you're literally giving the finger to God. And so how dare you? Of course I wouldn't do that. And to say, no, that's not what's happening. We're being honest with the issues and with the discrepancies in the Bible, the origin stories and all that.
Yes. And I think I'm a better human for it. I know that you've only been at it a year. I mean, maybe I have too, but maybe on a different level, a lot longer. But I definitely, maybe when you're a teenager, you're a crap human anyway, but I would say I think I'm a better human for opening my mind and what I've learned.
It's a great way to phrase it.
My daughter. Okay,
well,
Tim.
Thank you so much. It's been awesome. See you later.
Bye. Bye.